Yeah, 20 years or so.
And he's written a great number of books, starting with, I think, Hockey Night in the Dominion of Canada.
Yes, indeed.
And he even has a book with a character called Jean-Patrice that tells you how many books he's written to have gotten to that name. And well, actually, he's written so many books that if he writes any more, I think I'll have to mortgage my house. But here's Eric Zweig with his presentation, Art Ross, the legend who built the Boston Bruins.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to start with just a quick passage from the introduction to the book. This is written in the Toronto World in 1908 after Ross had played his first season in the Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association and helped the Montreal Wanderers win the Stanley Cup. The most popular player in hockey in Montreal, for that matter anywhere else, is likely Arthur Ross. One of the Ottawa players thus describes his effect on a crowd in the arena. When Arthur Ross skates down the ice, the crowd in Montreal Arena stands up and yells. As he returns to his position, he is showered with hand claps. Should he indulge in that excusable habit of passing the sleeve of his sweater across his nostrils, everybody says, "Good boy, Arthur." When he retires at halftime, he gets a hand. On his reappearance, a bevy of hands. Should he be ruled off, the crowd cheers, then hisses the referee. When his time expires, another hand. He receives enough attention to spoil a whole family. But strange to say, the big fellow takes it all in good part and only wears a size 6 7/8 hat. After just 1 year in the league, in the game's top league, Art Ross had established himself among the best players in hockey. It was a position he retained for nearly 10 more years in a playing career that earned him his place in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Yet those who know his name today are most likely to know him for the 30 years he spent in management with the Boston Bruins from 1924 to 1954. Even more will likely know him only because of the award he donated, which has been handed out each season since 1948 to the NHL's leading scorer. But Art Ross was so much more than just a name on a trophy. I wanted to write this book for a long time. I was working on it in bits and pieces over about 10 years by the time it was published this fall. This is the cover. This is the original cover in the old-timey Boston Bruins colors, but the marketing people decided the modern colors would sell better. I don't know if it'll make any difference, but I am happy now. At first I wanted to really stick with the old colors, but I think they were right. There you can see the photo. It was lightly colorized. I always wanted him, once it was decided Bruins would be, part of the title, part of the color scheme, I always wanted it to be a photo of him in this old-time Bruins sweater, which I really like, and I wanted it colorized the way it was, and I was glad they could. So this is the full picture that picture is taken from. Those are his two sons. That's Art Ross Jr. in the goalie equipment and John Ross. Art Ross III, Art Ross's grandson, his son, has oodles of family photographs. Most of these pictures come from him. This is another similar picture, though I think it must be a different time because they're now, John Ross is wearing the goalie pads and Art is dressed as a defenseman forward, it's hard to say. Now we go back in time. This is a picture from about 1891. Art Ross's father, the man in the beard in the middle, was a fur factor in the Hudson Bay Company. The family was raised in the wilderness, well, in Chicoutimi, which was mocked sort of earlier this year, which was actually quite civilized compared to near Sudbury, where they moved a little bit later. You'll often read in old hockey sources that Ross was the 12th of 13 children, but his parents only had 10 kids. This is the entire family. That's Art Ross next to his father. This is, again, the guy in the middle with the big collar is Art Ross. The youngest boys take it around the same time. Alexander is the one at the far end. Donald is the youngest one at the top. Colin, who became a doctor. 4 of the 10 children became doctors. After having grown up basically in the wilderness, they all went to university. Their mother was a high-achieving type. That's Colin Ross, and Art is the little guy in the middle. This is, in the late 1890s, there was the family more or less fell apart. There was a breakup between Art Ross's mother and father. This is now his stepfather, Peter Mackenzie, who married the wife, came to Montreal with 5 of the 10 children, This gentleman is Thomas Robert Ross, an older brother who is married to that woman, but the rest of these are children. The little guy in the front is Art Ross. So the two, Peter Mackenzie and Margaret Ross, were married in 1895 at Christmas time, and then came to Montreal, lived in this house, which still stands at 4492 St. Catharines. It's been long repurposed. It's a medical supply company. At least it was a few years ago when I was in Montreal. It might be something different now, but I went up onto the porch and knocked on the door, and I didn't really explain the whole reason why I was interested, but so I popped in, but there's nothing inside it that looks like it's a house from the 1890s anymore, though it still does from the outside. This house, this is John Ross in the 1950s or so. This is apparently the house on Western Avenue that Art Ross bought when he got married, and he had always lived in the family home, that other home, and then he lived with his older brother. He bought this house at the time he got married, and lived in it even after he moved to become the coach of the Bruins. The family stayed in Montreal for about 10 more years, so the family grew up there. This is what's on the site now. It's de Maisonneuve Avenue today, but this is what it looks like across the street, so you get a bit of an idea of what the neighborhood might have looked like at the time. This is what we're going back in time with. This is, no one in the family is really sure what this is. Is it a church group? Is it a school group? The kids seem to be at weirdly different ages, so it's tough to know for sure. This guy up here is Art Ross. There's no proof of it, but I believe this to be Lester Patrick. It just looks like him. And that might be Frank Patrick, but that I don't know. But that for sure is Art Ross about the age of 13 in Montreal. This is 1902-03, an intramural basketball team at the Westmount Amateur Athletic Association. This is Art Ross in a weird sort of pose, but it's very similar to the pose that you see him in the Kenora Thistles Stanley Cup team photo. That weird little, I don't know. None of these guys, their names are all recorded on the bottom of the picture, but none of them are anybody that went on to become anybody famous, though several of their faces show up in other team pictures that we'll see in a little bit. As a youngster, rugby, which was sort of, I mean, it's called rugby, it's called football, they almost use the words interchangeably at this time period. It's definitely sort of a hybrid between what's rugby back in England and what will be Canadian and American football. It was his best sport as a young man, or as even a young boy. He's only about 15 in this picture, and he looks even younger. This is him here as captain of the Westmount junior team that won the Quebec championship this year. This next picture is like my favorite picture. Some of these pictures are in the book, but most aren't. This is the next year, and he looks considerably older in that one year. But this is 1903. The Westmount intermediate team is now the amateur rugby champions of Canada. And this guy's from the basketball team, this guy's from the basketball team. A lot of those same guys obviously played a lot of sports together. The sweaters, it's a real mismatch of sweaters, but these W with the wings that several of them are wearing is the same team that the Westmount hockey team played. They played 1 year of senior hockey in 1904-05. Lester Patrick and Frank Patrick were on that team as well. But they had played intermediate hockey in the CAHL for many years, and that's the sweater that he wore. This is now 1908. After he had openly accepted money to play hockey out west in Brandon and in Kenora, rugby football remained an amateur sport, and so anybody who was known to have openly accepted money was no longer able to play. Some of them weaseled around it. There was one of the players for the Wanderers that everybody knew had taken money, but was said to have actually, in exchange for his playing, had accepted a powerboat instead, so somehow that wasn't the same as being paid, so he kept playing football. But Ross couldn't play, but he coached. This is the 1908 Westmount junior team that he coached to the city championship. This guy in the W here is Odie Cleghorn. A few years later, in 1911 and 1912, he coached the Montreal football team in what basically would have been, well, it already was. It was sort of the forerunner of the Canadian Football League at that point. It's, you know, the Big Four, the Canadian Rugby Football Union. This was a commemorative pocket watch he was given. The inscription that you can't read very well at all says, just presented to Art Ross by the Montreal Football Club 1911. He coached the team in 1911 and 1912. They didn't do very well. He didn't see, other than that one junior team, his playing playing career in rugby didn't seem to translate to coaching. They had 2 terrible seasons and would coach again later in 1921, and they were even worse. But he figured it out for hockey, I guess. This is another picture that I love. I'm not sure exactly when it's from, but I just think, I mean, clearly, even though when he played for the Kenora Thistles, he was only a player on loan, but clearly he got to keep the sweater. Or he just kept it. He's hunting or fishing or something. I mean, it's hard to tell what the hell he's carrying. It's a hook, it's not a fishing pole. Yeah. So and it's known that when he was in Brandon, he did a lot of hunting and fishing in northern Manitoba in the off-season. So it's possible it's as far back as then. But I just thought that was so cool. And Art Ross is just like wishes that sweater had survived over the years. They have very few bits of memorabilia from his career, but they do have some trophies and things, and tons of photographs. He was an outdoorsman. This is Art and his wife on a fishing trip at sometime after 1914 when they were married. I think that's a pretty cool picture too. I really like that. And this is from later. This is his wife again. And there's this famous story in the family of how she caught this 40-pound muskie or whatever the hell it is. And it truly is a muskie. I mean, I don't know a lot about fish.
I think that's the tool.
Yeah, it could be. I just thought that was neat.
I really like her fishing gear.
This is when Art Ross and his wife were married. It made bigger news in the paper, even though nothing about it says that he was a hockey player. I don't think that this would have made the 2 columns in the paper if he hadn't been. But all it basically says about them is a charming house wedding took place last evening at the bride's family home on Lorne Avenue when Miss Muriel Kay became the wife of Mr. Arthur H. Ross of Westmount. No mention of hockey, but as I said, I don't think everybody got a write-up like that in the paper. This is the record of the wedding from Ancestry from the city records in Montreal, and it confirms the address and everything. Much of what comes in the paper is reported on in here. This I just love. This is from the 1909-10 season. Mark Duran sent me this a couple of years ago, I guess after he did his talk in Penetang and I love the old cartoons like this of this era, but I like it's you probably can't really see it, but it refers to as the roster of all Montreal. And clearly you can see that there's Patty Moran in goal and every position. And I also find it interesting that he looks Chinese in this. There's no getting around it. And there was a discussion online a few months ago about, did Art Ross have Aboriginal blood? And there are some pictures where he looks like you could believe he was a native person. But he's not. I mean, there's no native blood in the family. A lot of Hudson Bay people did, take native wives and such. But so it's possible if you go back far enough in the families. But there's no, and in most pictures he doesn't, but in a few he does. But it's interesting that they've drawn him so Chinese. And John Ross tells a story about when they were boys in Montreal, and he remembered friends referring to his brother, Art Jr., as the Chinaman. So, clearly there was a look in the family at some level, and of course a lot less political correctness. This is from about the same time. The next season, so that's the season that all Montreal plays in the Canadian Hockey Association, who has gone to war with the National Hockey Association and loses. The salaries are skyrocketing that year, and the next year the NHA invokes this $5,000 salary cap. Many players are unhappy about it. Ross, for a while, retires, which he does almost every year from then on. And he briefly coached the McGill hockey team that year. Earl Zuckerman explained to me that McGill never hired coaches in that year. It was an honorary position. And it was unclear really if perhaps he had actually done anything with the team. But this is the team in Boston, which is kind of interesting too. They went down to Boston to play Harvard University, and clearly this is him with the McGill team. This is just another thing that Mark Duran sent that I found was interesting was he as captain of the Wanderers congratulating Joe Malone. I don't know how well it is to read that, but it's basically from Art Ross to Joe Malone, captain of the Quebec Hockey Club, prior to the Bulldogs defending the Stanley Cup against Sydney in 1912. Wanderers wish your team best of luck, Art Ross. Now we jump ahead a little bit to Boston. With Bruin, Al Bruin. His granddaughters are kind of horrified by this picture now, that not thinking that bear was the best treated animal in the history of the world. This is the Boston Arena. This is where the Bruins first played. The arena was first built in 1910, burned down in 1918, was rebuilt in 1920. Still stands today, looks somewhat less ornate, though this part is still incredibly fancy, and indoors when you go in, it's this gorgeous kind of marble arch. Northeastern University plays there today. It's called Matthews Arena now. But it's pretty cool. You can go in, they still use it for hockey, other things too, but it's like, you know, you walk around and look at the rafters, you know, this is where Eddie Shore started, this is where the Bruins began. This is Art Ross and Lionel Hitchman, I believe, on the ice at the arena. This is a few more of the Bruins. Where are we at here? I keep losing my page. Does that have the number there? 29, yes. That's Hitchman, Eddie Shore, Art Ross in the same sweater, George Owen, and the other guy I wasn't 100% sure, but it looks to be Bill Hutton, who played for the Bruins in 30-31 and 31-32. So that would sort of date the photograph. This is the Bruins did this sort of annually. It was a children's hockey clinic in Boston. Again, he's wearing that sweater. I wish that sort of survived. I love this sweater. This is a photograph from the Ace Bailey incident. This is Eddie Shore laid out on the ice after Horner has hit him. This is Bailey over here. And definitely seems like more people are concerned with what's going on with Ace Bailey, who was definitely worse hurt than Shore was. This is Art Ross with Bill Stewart, who people will probably know coached the Blackhawks in the late 30s, was also an umpire in the National League, and hence the, you know, you're out kind of thumb. This is a photograph from probably the 40s. Art Ross had been golfing and taken up golfing. He was good at every sport he tried, basically. He'd been golfing fairly competitively at a fairly high level since Montreal in the 19-teens. This is at a club in Boston. That's Art Ross Jr. They played in a lot of father-son tournaments, and then Art Ross Jr. would play in father-son tournaments with Art Ross III, who was not the same athlete his father and grandfather had been. And he just tells like horror stories of how horrible his father was to him at these father-son tournaments. I think this is Weston Adams, but I'm not 100% certain of that. Ross, this is Art Ross Jr., a little bit older. At his he got married in, I can't remember if it was 39 or 40, but basically at the time that his wedding was reported on, it was said that the family was going up to Montreal, where they still had many relatives, and that he would enlist in the Royal Canadian Air Force. His brother soon did as well. This is John Ross and Art Ross. It is said that Conn Smythe was so impressed that they came out from Boston. No, they were Canadians. They were born in Montreal. They had lived in Montreal until they were late teens. But they did, you know, not all, they didn't have to at this point. They were living in the States. Art Ross, Conn Smythe was said to be so impressed that Ross's sons had come up and do this that it ended the feud between them, which seems to be as every bit as nasty as everybody says, and was not a staged thing, that they really did hate each other until they sort of mellowed out. There's another picture. I don't know what's happened to this picture that makes their mouths all look so odd. But, so Art Ross Jr., both of them became fighter pilots. John Ross served in Burma and says not only did he not shoot down a plane, he never saw an enemy plane in the air when he was flying. Art Ross, on the other hand, flew a lot of combat missions, shot down several planes, and mostly sort of was like strafing truck convoys and trains on the ground. He was, it's told in the book, so some of you will have read this, but there was a whole magazine feature in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1945 that was apparently optioned for a movie but never made, about his, basically, adventure on he was one of the pilots that flew cover on D-Day, and in the days after D-Day were flying behind the lines to shoot up any of the German transports that were trying to restock the lines near the coast. And he was flying low over convoys, sort of shooting up everything he saw until he hit the last truck that was full of explosives. The truck went up in a fireball. His plane was only about 500 feet in the air. It went up in a fireball. He apparently, jerks the thing back, goes high up as he can, bails out when he gets to the point where it's like, I'm not really high enough to bail out yet, but I'm going to burn to death if I don't. Spends weeks sort of hiding from the Nazis, eventually falls in with the French resistance. It's a pretty incredible story that I won't go into too much more. But these are the wires that the family got. It was thought that he had died when the plane went up in the fireball, as it had. Did I write down the text on this? No. Well, so there's basically, this one says, regret to inform you that your husband is missing. And it was weeks and weeks and weeks, and even when he got to sort of, he couldn't say, it was months before he could send a word home. And the word only got home because, by fluke, a writer for a Chicago newspaper who recognized him saw him in a cafe in Paris, and just at the end of a text he was sending home for the paper, had added, by the way, to his editor, please tell the Ross family, I saw their son. And so this arrives, John Thompson cables from Paris, he dined with your husband last Friday. That's the first word that he wasn't dead.
Youngly loved young woman.
Yeah. And then apparently he sends home a telegram a few days later that says, sorry it took me so long to get away from the rats. And he comes home a little bit later. That is Art Ross 3. He'd probably be very disappointed I'm showing this picture, but he just looks, it's funny that he looks exactly the same as he looks now, even though he's about 4 years old there. But clearly sort of stunned by this machine gun that his father has brought home. Yeah. But he's American from Massachusetts, it's not a gun state sort of thing. He does not look comfortable with the gun. This is Art Ross Jr. and his wife at a game in Boston around the time that he is probably serving as the assistant general manager, which he was hired to do for 1 year in a real kind of case of nepotism. The family all says now, like the wife, Bunny, would say, he was never the same after the war. Granddaughter Victoria, who has worked for years now on post-traumatic stress with veterans, says clearly he had all the symptoms and signs, but nobody knew that then. The marriage fell apart. The family was really sort of a mess after that for a while. But I like the picture. So this is the Art Ross Trophy, which, as I take pains in the book, was not named after Art Ross or given in his honor. It was given by Art Ross and his sons. You can probably see that it says the Art Ross Trophy presented to the National Hockey League by Arthur H. Ross, Flight Lieutenant Arthur S. Ross, DFC, Flight Lieutenant John Ross, to be awarded each year to the leading scorer. That's what's engraved on the bowl of the trophy. That is, well, that's what the trophy looked like for a while. Now it's got the second set of wood and pucks. This is the Art Ross Trophy that you often hear referred to as the Art Ross Cup, which was donated in 1913 to the Montreal City League, eventually became a Quebec Trophy, became sort of competed by amateur teams in the eastern part of the northeastern United States and Quebec. You almost always hear it referred to as the Art Ross Cup. I think they called all the hockey trophies cups because of the Stanley Cup at once upon a time, though it's clearly engraved Art Ross Trophy. Not that that really means anything. Because I've often wondered if this weird ornate bowl had somehow been the original Art Ross Trophy, but clearly not. This, Stephen might know anything more about this. Stephen Smith sent this to me. It's clearly he's invented one of the ones that didn't work, a sort of chainmail armor for skates. They're still trying to figure out, you'd see Don Cherry would show those plexiglass things a couple of years ago. No one's really figured out a way to keep the feet from getting smacked around, but this one is, he was always tinkering, invented all sorts of gadgets and rules and changes that improved the game, but this one is clearly one that didn't pan out. This is one of the things, when he was inducted, often you'll see at the Hockey Hall of Fame, even his plaque says he was one of the original inductees in 1945, but he wasn't. He was inducted in 1949 in conjunction with the Bruins' 25th anniversary, and on December 3rd, the Bruins celebrated their 25th anniversary, and he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. This is one of the stranger of the gifts that was presented to him that night. This is a silver tea service that was presented to him from the gallery gods in Boston, who were the guys who sat in the cheap seats and sort of hurled abuse and garbage and things on people they didn't like. This is one of the keepsakes the family still has. This is a plaque that was presented to him by the National Hockey League. It says, presented to Arthur H. Ross by the member clubs of the National Hockey League on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of his appointment as manager of the Boston Bruins Hockey Club, and in grateful recognition of the many and invaluable contributions which he has made to the welfare of the league and the game of hockey. It's signed by Clarence Campbell, like this, I don't know, it's like engraved signed by Clarence Campbell, by Weston Adams from Boston, by Donat Raymond of the Canadiens, by Conn Smythe in Toronto, by John Reed Kilpatrick of the Rangers, by James Norris in Detroit, and by Bill Tobin of Chicago, where all the team logos are. I mean, people who know engraving would know better than me how they do it, but I'm going to have some kind of copy of the signature. This is later in life, obviously, about 1961 or 62. He's retired at that point. That's Art Ross III. That's John Ross. John Ross, basically, after the family, the Art Ross and his wife divorced, the family, the Art and his sisters are very close with their Uncle John, who's passed away now as well, but he's the guy that didn't raise them so much, but he's the father figure in their life after. This is one of the divorces I write in the book, that they were divorced sometime around 1959, but they didn't talk about it. Like, even in the family, they didn't really understand. They were like, why isn't Dad here? You know, there wasn't much talk about what had happened. And Art Ross really, I think, related psychologically somehow, as I say in the book, to ways that you probably couldn't even relate to, that because his parents had split in a similar acrimonious way, he never forgave his son, cut him out of his will, had nothing to do with him, supported the wife and the grandchildren, but had nothing to do with his son basically ever again after that. This is one of the last pictures